Μέρος του Ινστιτούτου Νίκος Πελατζάς, θέλουμε να καλωσορίσουμε τον σημερινό μας ομιλητή. Είναι μεγάλη μας χαρά που είναι σήμερα εδώ. Και να πω δύο λόγια απλά εισαγωγικά, ότι η σημερινή εκδήλωση εντάσσεται στα πλαίσια της ερευνητικής δουλειάς του Ινστιτούτου Νίκος Πελατζάς. Η ερευνητική δουλειά των τελευταίων 3 χρόνων, η οποία είναι σχετικά με τα κοινά αγαθά, με έμφαση στο νερό και τα ψηφιακά κοινά, η προώθηση αυτών των θεμάτων στη δημόσια σφαίρα, που αυτό θεωρούμε την δουλειά μας, περιλαμβάνει σεμινάρια, ανοιχτές εκδηλώσεις, εκδόσεις, έρευνα και κυρίως τη λειτουργία του Ινστιτούτου ως συνδέσμου, προκειμένου να έρθουν σε επαφή άνθρωποι που εμπνέονται και ενδιαφέρονται να συμβάλλουν στην προώθηση και τεκμηρίωση των σχετικών ιδεών και πολιτικών. Η ερευνητική ανασχόληση με το αντικείμενο, μέχρι τώρα κάτι που μπορώ να πω, είναι ότι αναδεικνύει ως ένα από τα σημαντικότερα θέματα τη σημασία και τα προωθητικά αποτελέσματα που θα μπορούσε να έχει δημιουργία μιας ανοιχτής άδειας που θα αφορά το hardware, στα πρότυπα της GPL, η οποία αφορά το software. Ο Stallman εργάστηκε για τη συγκεκριμένη άδεια, την οποία ολοκλήρωσε το 1989 και πρόσφερε τεράστια υπηρεσία στην εξέλιξη των ψηφιακών κοινών και την προστασία τους από τις κερδοσκοπικές επιθέσεις των εταιρικών συμφερόντων. Προκειμένου να παρουσιάσω τον ομιλητή μας, σας πω μόνο δύο λόγια, γιατί τα υπόλοιπα θα τα πει ο ίδιος. Ο Stallman από τη δεκαετία του 80, που ιδρύθηκε το Free Software Foundation, εργάζεται με σκοπό την προστασία της ελευθερίας στη χρήση των ηλεκτρονικών υπολογιστών και τη νομική και τεχνική υποστήριξη των δικαιωμάτων των χρηστών. Την ίδια δεκαετία ξεκίνησε την ανάπτυξη του λειτουργικού συστήματος GNU, στο οποίο αναφέρθηκε και προηγουμένως, δηλαδή του ελεύθερου λογισμικού, που σήμερα χρησιμοποιείται από εκατομμύρια υπολογιστές μαζί με την προσθήκη του Linux. Η θεματική στην οποία επιλέξαμε να εστιάσουμε σήμερα έχει να κάνει, το έχει ως τίτλο το copyright απέναντι στην κοινότητα, και ένα θέμα το οποίο καθίσταται όλο και πιο σημαντικό χρόνο με το χρόνο, καθώς βρισκόμαστε και σε αυτόν τον τομέα, όπως και σε πολλούς άλλους, σε αυτή τη μεταβατική φάση, όπου το προηγούμενο καθεστώς που αφορά το copyright, τις πατέντες και τα πνευματικά δικαιώματα, δεν είναι πλέον λειτουργικό, δεν εξυπηρετεί και το επόμενο δεν έχει ακόμα δημιουργηθεί. Σύμφωνα με τον Stallman, αν πραγματικά επιθυμούμε να υπηρετήσουμε την πρόοδο της τεχνολογίας με γνώμονα το κοινό καλό, τότε πρέπει να προχωρήσουμε σε θεσμικές αλλαγές και πρωτοβουλίες προς διαφορετικές κατευθύνσεις. Και ακριβώς αυτές τις θεσμικές προτάσεις αναμένουμε να ακούσουμε σήμερα με πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
The reason people invite me to give talks is because of my work in free software, ελεύθερο λογισμικό. It's free as in freedom. But this talk is not about free software. This talk, copyright versus community in the age of the computer networks, addresses a question people ask me as a follow-up to the issue of free software. They ask me whether the ideas of free software apply to anything other than software. For this to make sense, I have to start by giving you an introduction to the idea of the free software movement. So, free software means software that respects users' freedom and community. So it's ελεύθερο, it does not mean δωρεάν. We don't care about the issue of price. That's a minor detail. Whether you pay to get a copy of a program or you receive it gratis, either one is okay. Neither of them is an injustice in itself. We are concerned with something more important. Once you have a copy, what do you have? Does it respect your freedom or take it away? Does it try to divide you from other people? So, if the program respects the user's freedom and community, it's free software. But what is a program? What's a computer? A computer is conceptually a simple device. It can only do one thing: get the next instruction and do what it says. And get the next instruction and do what it says. And get the next instruction and do what it says. Millions of times a second. The instructions come from a program. Depending on what instructions are in the program, the same computer can do all sorts of different things. In fact, the program, the right program, could make that computer do anything except for certain things that are impossible. There are some limits, but within those limits, the program can tell the computer to do anything. So who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's you, when really it's someone else. You might think your computer obeys you, when really it's obeying someone else first, and you second. It only obeys you to the extent the real master permits. With any program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other, because there is no other possibility. When the users control the program, that's free software. What is freedom? Freedom is having control of your own life, having control of the activities you do in your life. If you use a program to do the activity, control of the activity requires control of the program you're using. So, this is an adorable GNU that needs a home. So, when the users control the program, they can control their activities, so the program respects their freedom. In order for the users to have control of the program, they need the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is to run the program as you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1 is to study the functioning of the program and change it so it does the activity the way you wish. Practically speaking, to have this freedom, you need the source code of the program. Over there is some source code. It's a combination of English and math. If you have learned the programming language, you can read that, understand what it means, and change it to do something else. In order to run it, we convert it into an executable, which is enigmatic 1s and 0s. For such a small program, a programmer could figure out what it does from the executable. But for a big program, the task of figuring out what the executable will do is tremendously hard. It's like deciphering an ancient language. So it's called reverse engineering. It's very hard, and the people who can do it are greatly admired for their ability. So if we told users, sure, you're free to change this program, just reverse engineer it first, that would be mockery. That's not respect for users' freedom. So free software must come with source code. These 2 freedoms give users separate control, meaning I'm free to change my copies and you're free to change your copies. Separate control is essential. Here we see it. Here's one user who is changing her copy of the program, and 3 other users that are using it the way it was written. Separate control is essential, but it's not enough because most users are not programmers. They don't know how to read and change source code. But they also deserve control over their computing. How can we give it to them? Through collective control over the program. Collective control means that each user is free to collaborate with other users in changing the program to suit their wishes. Here we see a group of 3 users that are working together to change the program. Those 2 are directly changing the code. They must be programmers. The third one is not directly touching the code. Maybe he doesn't know how to program, but they're all discussing together what changes they want. This enables non-programmers to participate in control over what the program does for them. The ones who collaborate are those who choose to. Here are 2 more users who are using the initial version of the program. They're not part of the group. Why not? Well, maybe they don't know about those 3. Maybe they know about them, but they disagree about what the program should do. Maybe they don't like what the changes those 3 are making. Maybe they dislike each other and don't trust each other. Who knows? Life is the relationships of people are complicated. Maybe tomorrow they'll start working together. It's up to them. The point is they're all free to cooperate if they choose. Collective control requires 2 more freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies of the program as you got it, to give or sell to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions to give or sell to others when you wish. With these 2 freedoms, the people that want to cooperate are free to do so. When one of them makes a changed version, that one can apply freedom 3 to make more copies of that changed version and then distribute them to others in the group. And they can apply freedom 2 to make more copies of this same version and pass them on to others in the group until they all have them. In addition, the same freedoms allow them to distribute those versions to others, including publishing them, offering them to everyone. One part of freedom 2 is especially important, and that's the freedom to share copies. Sharing copies means non-commercial redistribution of exact copies between people. Sharing copies is fundamental to society among people who use published works. And any attempt to stop people from sharing or punish people for sharing is an attack on society. It is antisocial. Any law, any technical system that aims to stop people from sharing, we must defeat. But note that when a work is free, that's a lot more. Oh, and thus people should be free to share copies of any published work. However, when a work is free, that's a lot more than just the freedom to share. The freedom to share is a part of freedom 2. And when the work is free, that means all 4 freedoms. I don't think all published works have to be free. I think that the published works that have to be free are those that are designed to be used in a practical way. Because when the work is meant for people to use in a practical way, the users are entitled to control over that work. But that argument doesn't apply to art or testimony or anything that isn't made for practical use. So there are different amounts of freedom that are appropriate to different kinds of works. So, and this reminds me of something I forgot to say at the beginning. First of all, if you take photos of me, please do not put them in Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine. And it can recognize people in photos from their faces or even the backs of their heads. So if you post a photo showing other people in Facebook, you are helping the massive surveillance system track that person. I think that's a bad way to treat your friends. In any case, I ask you not to do it to me. Also, if you want to take a photo of me with a mobile device, please turn off the feature that puts the current location into the photo itself. Because again, if you were to save or post a photo of me with a location datum, you would be helping Big Brother track me. Second, if you make a recording of this talk and you want to distribute copies, please do so solely in the formats that are favorable to free software. Those are the OGG formats and the WebM format. Please don't distribute in MP anything, because those formats are patented in some countries. Please especially do not distribute in Flash, because Flash requires non-free software. And please also make sure that the distribution site you chose allows visitors who go to the site in the normal way to download a copy without running any non-free software. And that includes non-free JavaScript software in the page itself. Now, this is the problem with YouTube, that to even see a video in YouTube, you're required to run a non-free program that is sent to your browser in the page itself. So please don't post my talks in YouTube. And please put on the recording the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a statement of a point of view. So, if the program carries these 4 essential freedoms adequately, then the program is free software. The users control the program, so it respects their freedom. But if one of these freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the users do not control the program. Instead, the program controls the users, and the owner controls the program. So a non-free program is an instrument of unjust power. It gives the program's developer or owner power over the users, power that no one should ever have. This is why non-free software should not exist. This is why, for our freedom's sake, we need to reject and escape from non-free software. Merely being non-free is an injustice, but nowadays the owners know how much power they have. They're fully aware of that power, and they're constantly investigating how they can use that power to gain further advantage over their own users, how to profit by pushing the users down. What they do is put in malicious functionalities. You may have heard the term malware. Malware means a program designed to mistreat the user. Most discussions of malware is half-blind. They talk about viruses. They ignore the fact that proprietary software products are often malware also. They don't want to talk about that. It would be too frightening and shocking to them. So I will. I'm going to tell you about the malicious functionalities that they put in proprietary software because they can. They're exercising the power that they have over the users. For instance, they spy on people. The Amazon swindle, that's not its official name, it's the Amazon e-reader. It spies on users. Every so often, it transmits the name of the book and the page number to Amazon. So even if the user obtained the book someplace else and not from Amazon, Amazon still finds out that he's reading that book. It's an Orwellian device. Such snooping or spying is found in many proprietary programs, in Windows, in Mac OS, in the Apple iThings, in Flash Player, in nearly all portable phones, in all the streaming services apps, and those streaming services use non-free software in the user's machine. The user has to run the non-free software, and part of the reason is so they can spy on people and keep track of what they're looking at. Such spying threatens democracy. But they go even worse. Oh, well, and this is why I say out, damn Spotify and flick off Netflix. But they get worse. There's also the functionality of refusing to function. This is known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. The intentional functionality of stopping users from doing things. And I don't mean a missing feature. I mean that they worked for years to design the system so that users would be unable to do certain things, like share. My principle is never use a device designed to attack your freedom in this way with DRM unless you have equipment to defeat the DRM, to break the handcuffs. DRM is digital handcuffs. The product puts the handcuffs on you if you use it. And since I won't stand for those handcuffs, I never use them. I simply do not use any of the products that are designed to restrict their users. I consider them evil. And then there are backdoors. A backdoor is a functionality in a program that allows someone to send a command saying, do this thing to the user. Of course, it could be anything, whatever they implemented, it could be. But typically, these are things that the users won't like, things that mistreat the user, things the users might reject if only they had a choice. But the backdoor doesn't give them a choice. In the Amazon swindle, there is a backdoor for remotely erasing books. We know about this by observation. In 2009, Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book in an Orwellian act. The book was 1984 by George Orwell. There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon said it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. If you are familiar with 1984, that's not a very comforting promise, is it? But actually, it wasn't a promise at all. Amazon was lying. Amazon has since resumed remotely deleting books without even an order from the state. Backdoors are known in some other products as well. Oh, I should have mentioned that digital handcuffs, digital restrictions management, is found in a wide range of products. The basis for it is found in Windows, in Mac OS, and probably in every other commercial operating system. Also in Flash Player, also in the Amazon swindle. Censorship is another malicious functionality. Apple was the pioneer of censorship of application programs in the iPhone. The iPhone was the first general purpose computer designed to censor what users could install. Users could not freely install any application program of their choice. They could only install programs approved by Apple from Apple's store. When users found ways to evade censorship, they called it jailbreaking, essentially recognizing that these computers are designed as jails for their users. That's our term for such a computer. It's a jail. There are also universal backdoors. A universal backdoor has the power to remotely change the software. For instance, Windows has a universal backdoor at least since Windows XP. In Windows XP, Microsoft did not admit this, but users discovered it. They proved that the universal backdoor existed. It's called a universal backdoor because it can be used to do absolutely anything to the user. Whoever controls the universal backdoor has total power over the user. Now, to show how things are changing, in Windows 10, Microsoft admits there's a universal backdoor. The shame about these nasty functionalities has disappeared. They have no shame anymore, because they have contempt for the users. They arrogantly believe that the users are so downtrodden that no matter how much they're told they're being mistreated, they will never rise up. It's up to you to prove them wrong. Now, we also know of a universal backdoor in the Amazon swindle and in nearly all portable phones. The backdoor in portable phones is used to convert them into listening devices. And once converted, they listen all the time, and they transmit all the conversation they hear. Not just when somebody's making a phone call, all the time. And remember that it has a speakerphone function. It can use that all the time. So you don't have to speak into the microphone. It can listen to you from over there. If there is a portable phone in this room, it could be listening to what I'm saying and to any questions I'm asked and any conversations you have. It's a total listening, spying device. And if you think that you can get your privacy back by switching it off, the joke's on you. There's no real off switch. You can't really turn it off. All you can do is say, would you please switch yourself off? And once it's been converted into a listening device, it lies. It says, yes, I'm shutting off, but it doesn't shut off. It keeps running and listening and transmitting all the time. The only way to stop it is to take out all the batteries. Sometimes there's a small secondary battery that can't be removed, but can keep it running for a substantial period of time. This is why portable phones are Stalin's dream. If you're carrying a portable phone, the phone system knows where you are all the time, and it can be listening to conversations around you all the time. If Stalin could have given such a device to everyone in the Soviet Union, he would have jumped at the chance, but that technology did not exist. Unfortunately for us, now it does. And most people are carrying these things. But I had good fortune. I was lucky, because before I ever started to carry a portable phone, I found out what they do. And I reacted in the same way you would have reacted 20 years ago. Are you nuts? You think I'm going to carry something that's going to track me everywhere and could listen to me all the time? Never. That's what you would have said 20 years ago if you knew how vicious these devices are. Well, fortunately, I knew, and that's what I said, and thus I've never had one. And I never will. Yes, they're convenient. It's a bit of a sacrifice not to have one, but it's my duty. It's my duty as a citizen to make that sacrifice. So I do it. One other final nastiness. When Microsoft finds out about security bugs in Windows, it shows them to the US government spy agency before it fixes them, thus giving the US government an opportunity to attack the computers of anyone at all, including yours, including those of the Greek state, and anyone. Do you think the Greek state should use Windows? Obviously not. But just because we know that Microsoft does this does not prove other companies do not do this. We simply don't know about other companies. Maybe they do this, maybe they don't. what we see here is that proprietary software is often malware. In fact, I've just given you a few examples which are the most widely used proprietary programs, and they're malware. This shows us that most users of proprietary software are victims of proprietary malware. But we have a lot more examples. To save time, I didn't mention them. They're in gnu.org/proprietary. They don't do this out of sheer sadism or lust for power. No, they do it to make money. They have found ways to profit at their users' expense through malicious functionalities, and since they have no conscience about these things, they do it. Some proprietary programs we know are malware. We have proof. Some we don't know. Most of them we don't know. There are thousands of proprietary programs, and most of them I have no information about. They might be malware or they might not, and we can't tell. We can never determine that a given proprietary program is not malware. I'm sure there are some, but we can't identify any because the developers are blocking us from investigating them. So every proprietary program is either demonstrated malware or possible malware. You can never have a rational basis to trust a proprietary program. It's always blind faith, usually in a company that has tricked and mistreated people before and clearly doesn't deserve that faith. The only way you can have rational trust in a program is if it's free software. Because with free software, the users have a defense against malware. The users control the free program. If they find out about a malicious functionality, they can change the code and take it out. They can make a changed version which doesn't do the nasty thing. And when users work on the program for any reason, perhaps to fix a bug or add a feature, they read the code, and that gives them a chance to check it as well. If they notice anything malicious, they will sound the alarm. This is a defense, and it's the only known defense against malware. So if you don't want malware, make sure the software is free. Which means you need to escape from proprietary software and come live with us in the free world that we have built. We built it with the GNU operating system and the kernel Linux. I started GNU in 1984. The goal was develop an operating system that would be completely free software. And in 1992, GNU was almost complete. Actually, in 1990, GNU was almost complete, but one component was missing. That component is called the kernel. It's the program that allocates the computer's resources to other programs. In 1991, Mr. Torvalds started writing a kernel called Linux, but it was proprietary software in 91. In 92, he made Linux free, so people could fit Linux into the gap in GNU, and they made a complete system which was basically GNU, but also had Linux. It's the gnu+linux system. You'll find that most people, when they talk about this system, call it Linux, which is unfair to us. It means giving us none of the credit, even though we're the ones who did the principal part of the work. It's unfair to us. It's actually insulting. If you know the facts and you still refuse to give us equal mention, it's insulting. Please don't do that. We only ask for equal mention. If you call the system GNU/Linux, you give us equal mention and you give Mr. Torvalds equal mention. That's what we ask you to do. Basically, gnu/linux is a free operating system, but in practice, not always, not entirely, because there are many different variants, different versions of gnu/linux. They're called distributions, and the people who maintain a distribution add more programs. And sometimes they add non-free programs, and that spoils it. Because an operating system is a collection of thousands of programs. In order for the collection to respect your freedom, every single piece in the collection has to respect your freedom, with no exceptions. If there's one non-free program that attacks the user's freedom and takes it away, then the collection as a whole attacks the user's freedom and takes it away. So in order to make a system that fully respects users' freedom, every piece, every component must be free software. In fact, there are over 1,000 gnu/linux distributions, and nearly all of them have some non-free software. There are around 10 which are entirely freedom respecting. See gnu.org/distros for more information. Once you've installed a completely free system, then you have to worry about web pages that try to run non-free software in your browser. This is quite common. We developed a browser called IceCat, which checks all the programs that come in the web pages to see if they're free or trivial. It permits the free programs to run, it permits the trivial programs to run, but any non-free, non-trivial program in a web page, it blocks. And that way you're safe from the non-free software. It does one other nice thing in regard to this. It searches heuristically through the website to find where and how to complain to the webmasters. So you can complain quickly. In just a minute, you can send your complaint saying, your site won't work for me because it tries to run non-free JavaScript code. Please fix it. Send. Takes you less than a minute. And it's a contribution to our cause. We need to pressure those webmasters to take our freedom seriously. And we've got to do it by showing them that we're not going to use their sites until they do. So, one of the obstacles to free software is that most people don't think about it. And part of the reason for that is a right-wing distraction and co-optation campaign that uses the term open source. I started the free software movement in 1983 and started developing the GNU system in 1984. And in the free software movement, we say, users deserve freedom, we demand freedom, and we'll work to get freedom if you don't respect it. That's why we develop free replacements for popular non-free programs, because we consider those non-free programs unacceptable. Our freedom is too high a price to pay for whatever convenience they will offer us. We are willing to make sacrifices to win freedom. Well, this idea bothered some people, especially once the free software movement got some success in the 90s. There were a lot of people in our community who liked free software, but they didn't like our insistence on freedom and justice. So in 1998, they coined the term open source to try to disconnect our software from our philosophy. And it worked pretty well, because they had another term which didn't mention or even hint at freedom or right and wrong. After all, the word open sounds nice, but it doesn't demand something on ethical grounds. That's why they like it. So they were able to construct a different discourse which completely rejects the idea that users are entitled to something. Where we say, if you develop and distribute a program, it is your moral duty to respect users' freedom to change it and redistribute it. That's freedom 1 followed by freedom 3. The open source people say, if you develop and distribute a program, please consider whether it's in your practical interest to let users change and redistribute it, because then they could improve the code quality. They're arguing for the same conclusion based on very different premises, because they have intentionally avoided the idea that users deserve some kind of freedom. They insist that it's purely a matter of what is convenient for the developers, they reject the idea that developers should not take freedom away from the users, which is the most important point of all. So they are encouraging the idea that developers are entitled to power over users, and they just say, maybe you don't insist on exploiting all your power. Maybe you'll be nice to the users. Whereas we are saying we demand freedom, not just improved code quality. That our freedom shouldn't be decided by whatever is convenient for businesses. We demand freedom. Unfortunately, they got the support of the majority of people back then in our community, and all the businesses just about, with few exceptions. And the politicians and the major media followed the businesses. And since then, in the mainstream media, you hear open source, but never free software, at least in English. It's somewhat different in some other languages in some other countries. But, of course, you're free to advocate whatever position you like. If open source is what you agree with, you have a right to say so. But if you agree with the views of the free software movement, why undermine your advocacy of those views by saying open source? Every time you say open source or open or closed, you're promoting the weak open source ideas instead of the principled free software ideas. And if you agree with our principles, show it. And the way to show it is always say elefthero and never open or closed. The importance of reverse engineering is shown when they sell you hardware whose specs are secret. That's quite common. So how do we write free software to run that hardware? We can't. They've blocked us. All they do, they won't tell us how to use the hardware. They say, here's a proprietary program to run our hardware, and they want us to run that, but we can't run that. There's hardware we simply can't use. And a lot of people in the community just pay no attention to this. There's a very popular small computer called the Raspberry Pi, and people in our community, they use it, they promote it. They don't pay attention to the fact that it can't run at all without non-free software. There are better choices. There are comparable machines that will run without non-free software, so choose them. Don't promote a choice with a fatal ethical flaw. Look at fsf.org/resources/HW/single board computers for information about these various models. So to solve this problem, we need reverse engineering. Somebody has to study how the proprietary program is controlling the hardware and figure out what the commands are to run the hardware. Then someone else can write the free program. Schools should teach exclusively free software. And they should teach the students the reasons for this policy, because it's to avoid teaching dependence. We need to teach society to be strong, not helpless. Teaching kids to use proprietary software is like teaching them to smoke tobacco. It's implanting dependence in society. They're both wrong for the same reason. Schools should never teach the use of a non-free program. And when I say schools, that includes everything from nursery school to university and adult education. But there's a deeper reason, and that is the school has to teach habits of cooperation. Teach people to be good members of society. So every class should have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class, including the source code in case someone wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, you may not, and that includes the source code. You've got to share the source code as well as the executable, so the other students can actually learn from it. Therefore, bringing proprietary software to this class is not permitted. The school, to set a good example, must follow its own rule. It must bring only free software to class and share copies with everyone in the class, including the source code, except for reverse engineering exercises, because the source code is the answer, and they shouldn't show the answers until after the students have turned in their work. But there's another reason for education in programming. Every program embodies knowledge. If the program is proprietary, it withholds that knowledge from the students. A proprietary program is the enemy of the spirit of education. So it should not be tolerated in a school except for reverse engineering, to pry that knowledge out of it. But a free program makes its knowledge available to the students. A free program is the supporter of education. And the way you learn to be a good programmer is by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. Free software gives you the chance to read the code of large, important programs we really use, and then the chance to try changing those programs. And that's how you learn to contribute to the development of a large program. Any school can offer students the chance to master the craft of programming if it is a free software school. And they all should be free software schools. Greece, like every country, should move the schools to free software, and not merely because that way it might save money in the future, although that's true, but because that's the only way to do proper education. It's not a cheaper way or more efficient way to do education. It's the way to do good education instead of bad and evil education. There's no room for a non-free program in a school. Human rights depend on each other. If we lose one, it becomes hard to defend the rest. Now that we use software and computing for so many important activities, we need to consider free software, and more generally control of your computing, as one of the human rights that we must insist on, because without it, it becomes hard to defend the rest. And sometimes that requires a sacrifice. Freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice. This is something that people seem to forget when they talk about using computing. You say to people, but that program takes away your freedom. It's an injustice. And they respond, but I really, really want to use it. And how big a sacrifice would it be if they didn't? Wouldn't kill them, you know. People have lost their lives, given their lives for freedom. And now they won't even suffer an inconvenience. Now, to risk your life for freedom, that takes a lot of courage. I don't know if I could do it. But the little sacrifices we need in this field, you don't need to be a hero to do that. The problem is we have people who value freedom so little they won't make even the tiniest sacrifice. They say to me, oh, I'll switch to free software when you show me a free program that is perfectly as convenient and perfectly as easy to use and has all the features of this one. And what they're really saying is that they assign zero value to freedom. And you can't make them change their minds, but you can expose them for what they are and cite them as examples to other people. And maybe some of them will be shamed into reconsidering their conclusions. So how do you help? Well, if you're a programmer, you can write free software, contribute to existing free projects. When you've done that 20 times, you'll know how to run your own project. But if you're not a programmer, there are other things you can do that are just as important. For instance, you can organize the free software movement. Organize activities to campaign to spread these ideas. You can persuade schools and governments to move to free software. For schools, look at gnu.org/education. For governments, look at gnu.org/philosophy/governmentfreesoftware.html. If you're, and government agencies should all move to free software so that they maintain full control of the computing that they are doing for the people. Government agencies, all state agencies, have a responsibility to the people because they're doing the computing for the people. They must maintain full control over that computing rather than letting it go to private hands. If you're an expert at using the gnu/linux system or specific free software, you can help other users. For instance, start a gnu/linux user group. And simply by saying free software instead of open source, you're helping our cause. So, people used to often ask me at the end of a talk about free software whether these ideas apply to anything else other than software. Well, what could they apply to? It's hard to apply these ideas to physical objects because for the most part there are no copiers for them. Like there's no copier for microphones, no copier for lamps, no copier for podiums or chairs or tables or tripods or bags or shirts. The things that people can, and you can modify physical objects. There are ways you could modify the shirt. You could modify the podium, like you could carve something into it or paint it or chop off the bottom or make it taller. And nobody's trying to stop you. You don't have to fight for the freedom to do that. We just have it. But the things that are a similar issue are various kinds of works, publications, or things that could perhaps be published. The point is they're works of art or authorship, and once they exist, we can often copy them. If they're digital, we can certainly copy them, and we can alter them. So that means the question of whether we should be free to alter them and whether we are free to alter them, whether we are free to copy them and redistribute them, that is a real question that arises in life. What should we be free to do with our copies of published works? And that's the question that I'm considering. After all, many programs are published works. You might have a copy of them. And the free software movement says you deserve 4 essential freedoms in your use of your copies of those programs. So now we're taking up the broader question, what if it's not a program? What if it's some other kind of work? Until very recently, the only thing that would restrict your use of your copies was copyright law. So you can pose the same question from the other direction by saying, what should copyright law say about what we can do with our copies of published works? To look at this question, it's useful to consider the history of copyright, which is connected with the history of copying technology. Now, changes in technology don't alter our basic ethical principles. Our basic principles are too deep. Changes in technology are more superficial. But when we apply our principles to a situation, we look at the consequences of an act. A change in the context can alter the consequences you expect from the same act. They can make it more good or more bad than it was before. For instance, if we could reliably resurrect the dead, then killing somebody wouldn't be so bad. The judge would sentence you to pay for the person's new body. Of course, in the United States, we would all need insurance in case we were killed by somebody with no money. But in civilized countries, the National Health Service would take care of it. Let's look at the history of copying technology and how it affects these questions. Copying began in the ancient world. It was done by reading one copy and writing another. This was slow and inefficient, but that's the best anyone had. It had other interesting characteristics. First, there was no economy of scale. To make 10 copies would take you 10 times as long as making one copy. Second, it required no special equipment other than the equipment for reading and writing. Third, it required no special skill other than the skill of literacy itself. Anyone who could use a book could copy a book just as well as anyone else. The result was a decentralized system of production of copies. Whoever had one copy and wanted another would make another. And so, in the ancient world, there was nothing like copyright. No one ever thought of it. No one ever thought of the idea of trying to say, even though you own a book, you're not allowed to copy it. Now, there was something rather similar, namely censorship. If the local prince didn't like the book that you copied, he could do any horrible thing to you for it. Now, this is not copyright, but censorship and copyright have always been closely related. Well, that went on for thousands of years, and then there was an advance in copying technology, the printing press. The printing press made it a lot more efficient to make copies, but only in mass production. So it made copying more efficient, but not in a uniform way. In ancient times, one-off copying and mass production copying were equally difficult. With the printing press, mass production copying got a lot more efficient, and one-off copying did not benefit at all. The fastest way to make one copy was to write one. To set the type would make it even harder. You see, the printing press has an inherent economy of scale because it takes a lot of work to set the type. But once that's done, you can make many identical copies much faster. In addition, the printing press and the type itself were expensive equipment. Most people who could read and write did not have a printing press. They also did not know how to use one, because running a press is a different skill from reading and writing. The result was a centralized system of production of copies. Copies of any particular work would be made in a few places in quantity, and then they'd be brought to various other places for sale. Copyright began in the age of the printing press. Modern copyright was started in England in 1556, I believe, as a system of censorship, religious censorship. It was censorship of Protestants. The English queen at the time, who was a Catholic, wanted to prohibit printing of Protestant books. So the law said that before you could print anything, you had to go to the state and ask for permission. And that permission was granted as a monopoly to one printer, which was what turned into copyright. But it was intended for censorship. A century later, the censorship part was allowed to disappear, and so the law was allowed to lapse. But the printers demanded their monopoly back. However, what was actually done was to give authors a monopoly for a limited period of time over the printing of their works. That was 14 years, although it could be renewed once, to 28 years, if the author was still alive after those 14 years. And the idea developed that this system of copyright was intended to encourage authorship. When the United States Constitution was written, there was a proposal to give authors, to say that authors were entitled to such a monopoly. This was rejected. The US Constitution makes a much wiser decision. It says, Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by reserving to authors and inventors for a limited time the exclusive use of their respective writings and discoveries. This tells us three important things. First, the Constitution does not require copyright, it merely permits copyright. Second, copyright's purpose is to benefit the public. It's not justified in the name of authors. The Constitution doesn't try to justify it in the name of authors, only in the name of benefits to the public. And third, it must last for a limited time. Ever since then, publishers have been trying to undermine and destroy that decision. However, in the age of the printing press, copyright didn't cause a big problem because it operated as an industrial regulation controlled by authors, regulating publishers, and designed to provide benefits to the public. If you were not a publisher, you would generally have no reason to object to copyright law because it didn't restrict you. The result was that copyright was uncontroversial, easy to enforce, and arguably beneficial for the public. It was uncontroversial because it only restricted publishers. People who were not publishers had nothing to complain about. It was easy to enforce because it only had to be enforced on publishers. And it's easy to find out who's publishing a book. You go to the store and you say, where did these copies come from? It's not necessary to invade everybody's home, everybody's computer, or everybody's internet connection. And it's arguably beneficial because, according to the philosophy of copyright law adopted in the US, copyright is a trade between the public and the authors. The public trades part of its natural right to copy anything, which it couldn't use. This right was a natural right, but was useless. So the public traded it away to the authors to get the authors to write more. And that was a benefit that really did reach the public. It's good to have more books written that you could read. It's good to have more conversation about important issues. And as for the natural right to copy anything, well, people didn't miss that since they had no way to copy anything except writing one by hand. And that was too much work. Nobody wanted to do it. But the age of the printing press is gradually giving way to the age of the computer networks in a new advance in copying technology, which makes copying more efficient than before, and again in a non-uniform way. In the age of the printing press, we had this. Mass production copying had become a lot less expensive, but one-off copying was still expensive. With digital technology, we get this. So one-off copying is still not quite as efficient, but they're both so efficient that we all are happy to do them. Hundreds of millions of people can afford to make a one-off CD or just write on a memory stick nowadays. It's true that a one-off CD is more expensive and not quite as robust as a mass-produced CD, but they're cheap enough for hundreds of millions of people to make. So this changes the situation for us. You see, it brings us to a situation more like the ancient world, where anyone who has one copy can perfectly well make another copy. We don't have the centralization that's imposed by the characteristics of the printing press or the record stamping machine. As a result, the effect of copyright law is totally altered, totally reversed. Even if the words of copyright law were the exact same as they were 50 years ago, the effect would be totally different, because now they want to enforce it against everyone. So we no longer have an industrial regulation, rather an intolerable oppressive regime. It's no longer controlled by authors, regulating publishers, and designed to benefit the public. Now it's controlled by publishers to repress the public in the name of the authors, because the same publishers have managed to gather all the power, the real power over the system, and they use this system to screw the authors too, while oppressing the public in the author's name. This system is no longer uncontroversial. People are starting political parties to fight to overthrow it. It's no longer easy to enforce, because now to enforce copyright the way the publishers demand requires invading everyone's home, everyone's computer, and everyone's internet connection. What is digital restrictions management except invading everybody's computer to impose restrictions on them? So when I say invading everyone's computer, it's the literal truth. And what is mandatory ISP filtering other than invading everybody's internet connection? I'm not exaggerating here. And it's no longer beneficial to the public because the rights that they say we've traded away are no longer useless for us. We can exercise those rights now. We can copy. We want to copy so we can share. And we must recognize that attacking the freedom to share is attacking society. It's divide and rule for an empire. We must overthrow that empire. So what would a democratic government do? A government that serves the people in an honest way. What would it do in the area of copyright? It would reduce copyright power to a point that is tolerable. Now, I don't say get rid of copyright. There's no need to get rid of it. But it would reduce copyright power to respect for the public the freedoms that are essential, such as the freedom to share any published work. We can measure the sickness of democracy around the world by the tendency of governments to do the exact opposite. They're making copyright more strict over and over. They're increasing the repression of copyright. First, let's look at the dimension of time. How long should copyright last? Copyright has been extended over and over to the point where in many countries it can last for more than a century. You can't wait for a work to go into the public domain anymore. And they're still making it longer. Just a few years ago, the European Union did yet another evil thing by extending the length of time of copyright on sound recordings. The US extended copyrights by 20 years in 1998 on both future works and past works. And given the Constitution, they had to say that this was meant to encourage production of new works. I don't know how they expect to encourage production of new works in the past by giving those works 20 more years of copyright. Have they got a time machine? Are they going to tell the authors of the 1920s and 30s and 40s that they're going to get more copyright, so they should work harder? Well, if they have a time machine, they haven't used it. We would see it in our history books. Why don't they use their time machine and get us more beloved classics? It's at least vaguely reasonable to think that more works will be made in the future once artists see, because artists see that they will now have 20 more years of copyright starting 50 years after their death. But only if they're crazy artists. If they're not crazy, they will realize that the value, the discounted present value, as economists put it, of 20 more years of copyright that far in the future is so tiny that it couldn't rationally influence their decisions. Well, unfortunately, most artists are not crazy, and so they won't be convinced to make more works, and this will be a failure. Of course, we know what's really going on. We know why that law was passed. Disney paid for it because the copyright on the image of Mickey Mouse was going to expire. Films with Mickey Mouse in them, the early ones, were going to start going into the public domain, which would permit anyone else to use that image inside their works. And Disney has gained so much benefit from the public domain that it really appreciates how important the public domain is and is absolutely determined never to contribute to it. So Disney purchased what we call the Mickey Mouse Copyright Act that extended copyrights, but only for 20 more years. So we expect that around 2018, we're going to see an attempt to extend it again. But this time, I hope we can fight back harder. But we also see business supremacy treaties. They're officially referred to as trade treaties, but what they really are is business supremacy treaties that are designed to smash democracy and give businesses more power. And one thing they do is demand that copyright last a longer time. The United States government bullies other countries into extending copyright. That's one dimension. The other, but the worst case today is Mexico. In Mexico, copyright lasts until 100 years after the author's death. So it's quite plausible that a work was written before you were born and you'll never see it in the public domain. And it's insane this policy is insane from any point of view except enriching companies at the expense of the public. Now, the companies that lobby for these laws, they pretend they're doing it for the artists. And whenever they have a testimony in a committee or some other event, they always bring a few famous artists who are really greedy, who demand all the possible money, who say also, yes, we want more copyright power. We want to stop anyone from ever reading our books without paying. Destroy public libraries. I feel they're robbing me every time someone reads my book in a library. Or at least make the library pay every time somebody borrows the book. I guess in the country where there's more than enough money for public libraries, that policy might be acceptable, right? But the fact is, most authors don't even want that. Most authors are not benefiting from this increased power because most authors are being screwed by their publishers. I found this out when I presented these ideas in a panel discussion with fiction writers. I expected arguments, and I got them. An award-winning writer said, after I proposed 10 years of copyright, the writer said, no way. Nothing more than 5 years, because he knew it wasn't going to benefit him. Anyway, length of time is one dimension, but the other is breadth, the scope of copyright. Which uses does copyright cover, and which uses are people free to do? In the age of the printing press, copyright was never conceived to cover all uses of a copyrighted work. No, there was a space of all the things you could do, and what copyright covered was the exception. But the publishers perceive in digital technology the opportunity to seize total power over, to establish and impose a pay-per-view universe where nobody's allowed to do anything with a published work without being charged and spied on and restricted. And the way they want to do this is with digital restrictions management. The malicious functionalities that turn our own technology into our prison guards. So to get this, they are to reinforce their power. They are passing laws in many countries to make it illegal to break the DRM, or at least to make it illegal to show other people how to break the DRM, to release software or hardware designs that can break DRM. They started this in the United States with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998. And then they've spread it to the European Union and many other countries through business supremacy treaties. And these laws explicitly say that the only excuse for a program or a device that can break the digital handcuffs is if it has another commercially significant use. Not culturally significant, not educationally significant, not socially significant. No, only commercial significance can justify allowing people any freedom. So they're clearly taking a stand against society, for business against society. But those laws keep spreading and keep doing harm. So that's what's happening. And with their digital restrictions management, they can impose the pay-per-view universe because they release the work in an encrypted form that can only be accessed through a proprietary program designed to restrict people. And that program imposes the pay-per-view. And attempting to bypass that program is prohibited by this unjust law. So, what should a government do in the area of copyright if it wants to respect people's freedom? Well, it should reduce copyright power. First, there's the dimension of time. I propose copyright lasts 10 years from the date of publication of the work. Why from the date of publication? Because until the work is published, we don't have copies, so it doesn't matter what we could or couldn't do with the copies we don't have. We might as well let the author have as long as it takes to arrange for publication of the work and start the clock then. Why 10 years? Because that's plenty long. In the US, most works are remaindered within 2 years and out of print within 3. 10 years is more than 3 times that. It's got to be enough. Only a tiny fraction of works remain in print past that anyway, and they've got plenty of time to make money within 10 years. And on the other hand, you can wait 10 years. If a work is copyrighted for 10 years and that means you can't do what you want to do, 10 years is not so long. You can wait. Now, that award-winning author who disagreed with me and said no more than 5 years, that's because he had a legal dispute with his publisher. His book was out of print, practically speaking. His fans couldn't get copies. They said to him, the publisher won't sell us copies. How can we get copies? His contract said that if the publisher let it go out of print, the rights would revert to him. But the publisher wouldn't admit that it was out of print. From sheer orneriness, the publisher wasn't making any money off of it. The publisher wasn't selling it. Why didn't the publisher just say to him, okay, you can distribute it yourself? He could have emailed copies to his fans, you see. He wanted them to be able to get copies so that they could read his book and appreciate it. But the fact is, even though he'd won an award, it wasn't a bestseller, and the publisher didn't bother to keep it in print. The publisher was using the copyright on his own book to suppress his distribution of it. So he had concluded that more than 5 years of copyright would never do him any good, but they could do him harm. Well, I don't insist it has to last 10 years. If everyone else prefers 5 years, I'll go along with it. I'm just trying to be a little bit cautious, not quite so radical as that fiction writer. In any case, then there's the dimension of breadth. Which uses of a copyrighted work should copyright cover? Well, we must legalize sharing copies of any published work. And we must make sure that the publishers cannot take that right away from people. Once the right has been initially given to people, we must make sure that the publishers can't strip it away again. So we should make DRM a crime. Selling or making systems designed to restrict the users should be a crime. And we must stop the publishers from taking away users' rights by imposing contracts on them. With printed books, if you buy it, you have the rights that copyright law says you have. But with anything digital, they're likely to impose contracts that are there only to restrict the user. These contracts should be declared void through legislation. Legislation should say that any contract which denies the members of the public certain rights in using published works are void no matter where they were signed. They're void here, where here is everywhere or anywhere. Any country that has the courage to pass this law should make those contractual restrictions void. Because otherwise they'll just claim the contract shall be interpreted according to the laws of such and such place. So the law has to say, no, we don't care about the laws of such and such place. Those restrictions are void here, regardless of anything. So which uses of copyrighted works should we permit? For that, we have to distinguish categories of works. I distinguish three. There are the works designed for doing practical jobs with. There are works that state somebody's thoughts. They're works of testimony or opinion, for instance. And there are works of art or entertainment. Now, these kinds of works all contribute to society, but in three different ways. And I don't think that we have to draw the same conclusions for them. First of all, the works of practical use. The argument I presented at the beginning applies to them. For users' freedom, the users must have control over these works. Therefore, the users must have the for freedom. These works should all be free. Users should be free to make modified versions and publish them. I hesitate to advocate this as a change in the law today because society's not ready for it. To absolutely prohibit proprietary software would tend to have bad results, like prohibiting cocaine. I don't think it's wise to take cocaine, but prohibiting it is very harmful to society. So I don't advocate that change immediately, but I'd like to see a society in which all those works are free. But that argument about users' control doesn't apply to works of opinion or to works of art. We don't need to have control over statements of other people's opinion or the art that we appreciate, because we're not using it to do jobs of any practical kind. That's not what those works are for. So it's okay to have a copyright system that covers modification and commercial distribution. So what I recommend for them is a reduced, compromised copyright system that would cover all modified versions and all commercial use. And it would legalize sharing. In the case of artistic works, the question of modified versions was a difficult one, because there are arguments both for and against modified versions, valid arguments. On the one hand, a work can have an artistic integrity, and modifying it can ruin that integrity. On the other hand, most authors don't care so much about the integrity. If you look at the ways they allow movie companies to turn their works inside out and ruin them, you see those authors don't have all that much integrity. Of course, there's some authors that don't allow that. Apparently, they do have artistic integrity. So that's a valid argument on one side. On the other, modification of an artistic work can contribute to art. If you look at the folk process, you can see that repeated modifications can make something very rich. And if we consider only named, known authors, consider Shakespeare. Some of Shakespeare's plays used stories that were borrowed from other works by others. And if today's copyright law had existed then, those works of Shakespeare would have been copyright infringing and would never have been made, of course. He would have known better than to try to stage a play that would infringe such a rule, so he would never have written them. And if he had complained, the copyright holders would have said, Shakespeare just wants to make a cheap ripoff of my great work. It wouldn't be worth anything, so we shouldn't let him. And if he had never made those, we would never have any way to question that claim. But since those works do exist, we can say they're important contributions to literature, and therefore the claims of those copyright holders that a modified version is only a cheap ripoff are not true. They're not valid claims. Oh, sure, many of them will be cheap ripoffs, but because most 90% of everything is crap. But they have as much of a chance of being good as any other work of art. Eventually, I realized that if copyright only lasts 10 years, you can wait. So during those 10 years, we can have this compromised copyright system that covers all modification and all commercial use and legalizes sharing. And then the work goes into the public domain and people can make modified versions. Another crucial point about copyright law is we must legalize remix. Remix means taking pieces out of various works and putting them together to make a totally different work. And that's what we want copyright to encourage. The difference between remix and a modified version of a particular work is clear in practice. A modified version of a particular work is mostly that work with a certain fraction changed, whereas remix is pieces of a lot of things put together to make something totally different. When copyright law is interpreted to block remix, it's totally perverted. It's working exactly against its goal. And that would only happen when the control of the law has been taken by companies that have twisted it into a way they can profit and disregarded its purpose. So we have to explicitly legalize remix. When we talk about legalizing sharing, the publishers say, oh, you can't do that. That would steal from the artists. Of course, that's bullshit. It's the publishers that steal from the artists all the time. There was a musician who said, copy all you like. I don't have a contract with you. I have a contract with the record companies. I don't like it that they're stealing from me. In fact, in the US, until around 10 years ago, record companies printed large numbers of records that they didn't report to the musicians, so they were cheating the musicians explicitly. But even before they did that, they had already shafted the musicians. I buy CDs, but when I do, I am sad that I am not supporting the musicians, because I know the record companies don't pay the musicians. Here's how they do it. New musicians sign a contract that won't pay them any money. It's designed so that they won't get any money unless they get to be tremendously successful, more than a gold record it takes before. Yes, supposedly a certain fraction of the price is for the musicians, but the production and publicity expenses are counted as an advance to the musicians. And almost no record ever sells enough to finish, so, quote, repaying, unquote, that, quote, advance, unquote. And until it gets that far, the musicians get nothing. The only musicians who don't have this problem are the long-established stars, because they came to the end of their first contract and they had so much clout that they could sign another contract that didn't screw them. For those musicians, for their later records, when you buy them, they actually get some money. But for their first records, which remain forever under the first contract, they still don't get any money for those. So I'm not impressed when record companies, the ones that arrange to sue a bunch of teenagers for hundreds of thousands of dollars, complain about anything. I believe that what the record companies deserve is to be destroyed. They deserve to lose everything for the crimes they've committed. And then there's the lobbying they do for unjust laws. No, they deserve to be smashed. But the only way nowadays, you don't find so many records in record stores. There aren't so many record stores anymore. It's hard for me to get music in a way that is both lawful and not oppressive to me, because the only way is buying CDs, and often I can't do that. Now, maybe I could order CDs through the internet, but then they would be tracking me, and that's oppressive. In a record store, I can pay cash, and they don't know who bought the records. That's what makes it ethical. But over the internet, you can't pay cash. So it's an oppressive system. And digital music distribution is nastier because it typically involves an end-user license agreement, which I won't agree to ever. You know, they may say it's illegal for me to share with you, but I'm never going to say I won't share with you. I'd be committing a betrayal of you, of society, if I ever agreed to that. So I never agreed to that. Yes, I could sign it and then disregard it, but I'd rather say no to them. I'd rather refuse to agree to those contracts. So we can ignore what the publishers say about supporting artists. They're hypocrites. But we do need to support artists if we want arts. We must reject the misguided idea of remunerating the rights holders. First of all, because remunerating or compensating is the wrong concept. Because that presupposes that if we appreciate a work, then we have a debt of money to the artist. And that's unacceptable. It's not about compensating them. Seeing and appreciating a work doesn't do damage to an artist, so what do we have to compensate? Nothing. No, it's that we want to support artists so that they will be able to do more art. That's a valid goal. And second, when they say they're rights holders, It's a swindle. They want you to think it means the artist, but really it means the companies. So if you ever accept anything that uses that term, you're being cheated. I object to schemes to compensate the rights holders. I am for schemes to support artists. Now, there are some fine ways to support artists. Selling copies is fine. I have no objection. I buy copies. And selling tickets to a performance is fine. I have no objection to that practice. I sometimes buy tickets to performances. But it might be nice to support artists more, because the existing system does a lousy job except for the superstars. We might want a system that will support artists more. So here are two proposals. One is through the state. The state could collect some money somehow, and it doesn't really matter how. That's a secondary issue. But each year there'll be a certain amount to divide among artists based on their popularity. Why based on their popularity? Because the copyright system claims to do that. I'm just being conservative here. Of course, there are other systems that support artists based on other criteria, and I think that's fine too. But this one I'm trying to keep somewhat similar in its overall outline to copyright. So how do you measure their popularity? You could do it by sampling or polling people or counting how often the works are being shared on public sharing networks. Once you've got a figure of popularity for each artist, how much money does that artist get? The obvious way is linear proportion. So if A is twice as popular as B, A gets twice as much money as B. If A is a star and is 1,000 times as popular as B, then A would get 1,000 times as much money as B. Well, this means the system will give bad results. Most of the money would go to a few stars, and the artists that really need more support, the artists where we might help support the arts, won't get enough. It won't make any difference. All it will do is make the rich richer. So I propose to change it. Let's take the cube root of the popularity of each artist. The cube root of 1,000 is 10. So if A is a star and is 1,000 times as popular as successful, capable, appreciated non-star B, with the cube root, A would get 10 times as much money as B, not 1,000 times, just 10 times. The effect of the cube root is to shift most of the money from the few stars to the more numerous medium popularity artists, the artists who could really benefit from a little more support. So this way, the same amount of money will efficiently support the arts a lot better. A lot more artists will be able to get rid of their day jobs and focus on their art. Because this system will be so much more efficient, it won't need very much money. The amount of money that gets distributed this way could be a lot less than what we're paying now to the publishers, because it won't be using trickle down to support the artists. And because we could achieve so much more of supporting the arts with so much less money, we don't need to worry about precisely how they get this money from us. For instance, Greece is now considering a law that would impose a tax on blank media and empty discs for the foolish and totally socially useless purpose of handing it to the collecting societies that can't be trusted anyway. If this money were distributed directly to artists based on the cube root, it could do some real good. Now, I'm not one of those who's against paying any money. I'd like to support the arts better. I'd be happy to pay a tax of a few percent on whatever it might be, if it goes efficiently to support artists. But the other method I propose is through voluntary payments. Suppose each player had a button you could push and it would send a little money to the artists anonymously. And you could push it if you feel like it, and otherwise you don't. It's totally up to you. But when you push it, you'll feel good. I know whenever I see musicians performing on the street, if I like the music, I give them some money and I feel good. I think almost everyone will feel good from this. It should be a small amount of money, but not a tiny amount of money. The best amount would depend on the country. Economists could calculate which size payment would lead people to send the most money per day, and that would be the best amount to maximize the society's support for the arts through this channel. And there are poor people who would never push this button, and they'd feel sad, but they know they can't afford it. But that's okay. We shouldn't try to squeeze money out of poor people to support the arts. There are enough non-poor people who will be happy to support the arts, who will be glad to send the money. And if we wanted to encourage it more, we could have TV commercials saying, "Did you send a little bit of money to an artist today? Why not? Push the button and you'll see how good you feel." But nobody will be forced to. Nobody will be punished or condemned for not doing it. So compare this with the actual publicity campaign saying, if you share, you're a pirate. If you share, you're stealing, vicious and cruel. And you'll see how much better this is. Now, these two methods can also be combined in various different ways. There are many variations that can be designed. What they have in common is they're all designed to go with sharing. With these systems, artists would all say, "Please share my work. Please share it. Show it to more people. If you liked it, show them, maybe they'll like it too." Because the artists will know that this will also get them more money. All artists start out hoping for their work to be appreciated. And a few of them get very rich to the point where they become greedy and they want the money more than anything else. For instance, the woman who wrote the Harry Potter books. I launched a boycott of Harry Potter in response to an atrocious thing that she did. She wants money so much that she designs these sophisticated marketing plans to build up anticipation, and there's a date when the book is going to be sold, but people are supposed to come order it in advance to get their books on that date. And once they made a mistake, books were put on sale before the intended date in a bookstore. I think I read that the publisher put the wrong date on the package, and the people in the bookstore obeyed that. The date that was written came around, so they put the books on display and started selling them. And then someone noticed this and said, "These books aren't supposed to be on sale now." Horrors. Well, of course, the bookstore employees took the books off display, but people had already bought them. And this is what horrified that author. She went to court and got an injunction ordering these people not to read the books. So I responded with a boycott. I don't say you shouldn't read these books. I just say you shouldn't buy them. As for saying you shouldn't read them, I leave that to her. Well, only a few authors get corrupted by money in this way, because most authors never get enough money to corrupt them. So they go on wanting people to appreciate their work. And, but they do need an income. And so if we can support artists better, they'll be able to do more art and better art, and they'll be able to develop their talents to the maximum. I'm in favor of that. That's why I don't suggest abolishing copyright. There are certain freedoms we need, and we must fight for those. But we don't need to be free to do absolutely anything with any work of art today. We can live with a compromised copyright system, and if it helps support the arts, I'm willing to tolerate it. But copyright has had a long association with censorship. Nowadays, in the US, there's a system of notice and takedown. Anytime someone complains to a website saying that a certain publication there is copyright infringing, the site has to take the work down immediately. And then whoever posted it has a chance to argue that's not so. But even if the accusation was false, it has to stay offline for a period of time. I think it's 10 days. And this is extremely effective for censorship. People who want to sabotage any kind of campaign just have to make a false copyright infringement complaint, and the work will be down for 10 days. And then it will come back up because the complaint was false, but that's too late. The sabotage has already been effective. Greece should not adopt such a policy. But they're not satisfied with that. The publishers that want to make these complaints, they're not satisfied with that. They won't stand for any scheme to punish false complaints because they make false complaints all the time. They complain that people who publish their own work are copyright infringing, or somebody makes a video and there was a radio playing in the background and there was a song, so that's copyright. They go so far. But what they want is to require all the sites to check everything automatically. But only some companies can afford to do that. Google can do that. Smaller organizations may not be allowed to publish anything without running it through a filter run by someone else, which is a perfect scheme of censorship. So that also is dangerous. Another kind of censorship that's proposed to impose on Greece is filtering of the internet. Filtering of the internet is a form of tyranny. Governments that impose filtering of the internet are attacking human rights. And the money of these parasitic companies that are screwing artists and draining the public and attacking our freedom cannot justify something tyrannical. Greece must reject those parts of the proposed law. Now, people may wonder whether voluntary payments can really support artists. The fact is they're already doing a pretty good job. There are artists who put their work on a website and say, download it and pay me if you like. Several years ago, around 13 well-known science fiction writers published the Humble ebook bundle. They said, download it and pay if you like. They got $1 million in a month. one told me this was equivalent to being on the New York Times bestseller list. I complained to him that they didn't allow people to pay anonymously. They had to pay through the internet, which I won't do. I won't use those payment methods ever at all. But he said to me, it would be too much trouble to take money orders to the bank and cash them. But when I saw they made $1 million, I figured they could afford to pay somebody to do that. And then there's crowdfunding. Crowdfunding basically is raise the money to do the project in advance. And this works over and over. So yes, voluntary payments do work already. But those are typically bigger payments, which fewer people will do. The more we allow people to pay smaller amounts, the more people will start contributing, and the more amounts of support for the arts we can get this way. So the payments that this would send, they wouldn't be like 10 euros. They might be 1 euro cent in Greece. Maybe that would be the best amount. In a wealthier country, maybe it should be 20 euro cents. The amount would vary according to the economic conditions in order to maximize what people actually send. It's clear we can do this, and the GNU project's anonymous payment system called gnu+linux can be extended to handle this. The idea of gnu+linux is it's anonymous payments, but not anonymous receipt. The payer is anonymous, the payee is always identified. So it's designed not to permit tax evasion. It's not a currency, it's just a payment system. People would pay amounts denominated in whatever currency they were using. And encryption would guarantee that there is no practical way to discover who made the payment. So you could pay to download something, and it would be totally anonymous. You have to make sure the rest of your communication protects your privacy too. You'd have to go through Tor. You know, you'd have to make sure that they couldn't tell who you were from your IP address or cookies. But that can be done. And then you could pay anonymously for a download of a published work. I really want to do that someday. And this payment system could work that way too. Thaler can extend to handle payments of 1 euro cent or whatever amount it turns out to be. So at this point, it's time for me to auction the GNU, or at least try. This is an adorable GNU that needs a home. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. If you buy it, I can sign the card for you. If you have a penguin at home, you need a GNU for your penguin. Every penguin should have a GNU. No penguins without a GNU. When you bid, please wave your hand and shout the amount as loud as you can. I have hearing problems. If you speak quietly, I can't tell what you said. So shout. We can accept payment in cash, with a bank card if it can make international purchases by phone, or with Bitcoin if you have something here to make the payment with in front of me. I'm sure I will be answering questions for a long time, so you'll have time to go out to a bank machine and come back. Are the banks in Greece delivering cash these days? And I have to start with basically the standard price of 25 euros. Do I get 25 euros? 20, how much?
30.
I've got 30. Do I get 35 for this adorable GNU? 35 euros, how much?
40.
I've got 40. Do I get 45 euros for this adorable GNU that needs a home? 45, how much?
50.
I've got 50. Do I get 55 or more? 55 euros for this adorable GNU? 50, what? No, I have a higher bid already. I've got 50. Do I get 53? Sorry, I get 55 or more for this adorable GNU? Last chance to bid 55 or more for this adorable GNU. How much? I got 55. Do I get 60? 60 or more for this adorable GNU? I've got 60. Do I get 65? I've got 60. Do I get 65? 65 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. 65 or more for this adorable GNU. Last chance to bid 65 or more. Last chance. How much? 65. I've got 65. Do I get 70? I've got 65. Do I get 70 for this adorable GNU? 70 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to bid 70 or more. How much? I've got 70. Do I get 75? I've got 70. Do I get 75 for this adorable GNU? 75 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to bid 75 or more. Last chance to bid 75 or more. Gone for 70. How do you wish to pay? What? Can't hear you. How do you wish to pay? Cash. So, want to come up and pay now? It's always good to pay cash. Resists massive surveillance that threatens democracy. If the government knows who goes where, if the government knows, I can probably find you the change you need. So I'll give you the change after.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to cheat you. You see. I don't. You bid 70. So on the other hand, if you want to make a donation of 30 euros to the FSF, we welcome it. We accept donations, but you don't have to. And anyone can donate any amount to the Free Software Foundation here. We also have these little metal stickers that are 2 euros. And we have these Run GCC stickers. It's a sort of a joke for 2 euros. And for 15 euros, we have these lapel pins. And out on the desk, out at the table outside there, we have stickers that are gratis. So please take them and put them in permanent places. Now it's time for questions.
Hi. What's your stance on the desired copyright state status of journalism pieces and news compared to art and, as you say, practical things?
Well, I'd say that journalistic pieces are in the second category. They're statements of opinion or testimony. They're not meant to be used to do practical jobs. You don't build something with a news story. They do not do practical jobs. They provide information. And mostly they're not generally useful technical information. It's not how-to information. It's what we've seen information. So I don't think they ought to be free, but we have to be free to share them.
Hello. It was a real honor hearing you. I have already studied several of your opinions during my thesis. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is your theory on copyright. Is it documented somewhere? Have you written about
Yes.
it?
There's a transcript of a talk on this topic in gnu.org/philosophy/copyright versus community.html.
Thank you very much. And the second one is, well, the first document I found of you is from this book. It's originated back in 1999. And at the end of it, you posed several questions on several themes. For example, you said, on the issue of secret hardware, which you do mention on your speech, you said, we have to have the determination to have freedom. On the issue of non-free libraries and free documentation, you said that the future depends on philosophy. On the case of software patents, you said that we should have freedom and principle. My question is that 16 years after you wrote that, how do you think that things are going?
Things have not changed all that much. We still face those same problems. And in some areas they've got worse, and in some areas we have beaten them back. Of course, I said a lot of specific things about those issues, not just those short phrases.
You said that the kind of freedom is to be able to modify a software.
Well, what I said was that in order for people using software to have freedom, they need to have control over the software they're using, the software that does their computing.
How can this be possible if software, for example, Linux, distribution of Linux has a limit?
There are no distributions of Linux. You must be talking about the GNU system, about my work, and attributing it to someone else. I hope you didn't intentionally insult me. If you didn't intend to insult me, please say that right.
I had in my mind Ubuntu, Debian, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, those are distributions of gnu/linux.
Okay, all this distribution of gnu+linux, that they have a million of lines of code, how can be controllable from the users?
Well, one person can't master all of the code in a gnu/linux distro. I can't make us superhuman. But we do have, the free software does mean that the users overall control the software. Now, if you're a programmer, you don't have time to study all that software, but you can study any of it. And there are other users who are programmers, and each piece is being studied sometimes by some of those people. Now, there's one thing that all the users want, and that is they want the program not to be malware. So anytime any user who's a programmer studies any of these programs, they are keeping their eyes open for malware. And if they ever spot any malware, they will raise a scandal. And this way the community will get rid of the malware, and thus the community more or less defends itself against malware. This is not a perfect defense. It's not guaranteed, it doesn't work every time for everything. But it's a defense. It works, it can protect any piece of malware that might be there, we can spot, and then we will fix it. So this is a lot better than proprietary software where the users are totally defenseless. Now, if you can find a better defense against malware, that might be nice, but nobody has ever found a better defense. It's this or nothing.
Unfortunately, even free software programs, they are not free from malware. For example, Ubuntu tracks what are you doing.
Yes, and but notice that we have used our defense. People have made modified versions of the Ubuntu search software which doesn't snoop on people. So our defense is working, it's just that the Ubuntu developers were very stubborn. But I think that sooner or later they will drop that, and that will be a victory. The point is, the fact that the program is free software gives us a defense, but it doesn't mean automatically that we use that defense to its fullest. Now, if more people were to condemn and reject Ubuntu because of that snooping, we would have pressured them faster. So the lesson here is put more pressure on those like Ubuntu. Ubuntu is one of the non-free gnu/linux distros. They start with the free gnu/linux system and they add a lot of non-free programs, which is an injustice, and they shouldn't do that. So this is another reason why you shouldn't promote Ubuntu. I never urge people to install Ubuntu. The GNU project recommends the free distros. Look at gnu.org/distros.
You said you have been working on the free software movement since 1983. And I want to ask, how come you thought about an issue like this so early? It was different back then.
Oh, it's because in the 1970s I was in a free software community. In 1970, many operating systems were free software. It was not so unusual. By 1980, the last remaining free software community, as far as I know, was the one at MIT where I was. So I had many years of experience in the free software way of life, and I saw that it was good. But then my community died in 1982. And I spent 2 years punishing the ones who had killed it. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life punishing. I wanted to build a new good community to replace so that people could have freedom and using computers could be a good thing. And the way I did that was with developing the GNU system.
Do you think we can extend somehow the ideas of free software to fabricating things? I mean, we have increasingly...
Yes, because a design for a hardware object or product is a work. And it's a work made to be used to do practical jobs. So it should be free. But at present, since we are mostly stuck with products made by factories, we don't really have an opportunity to use the free works instead. But that's slowly starting to change. There is 3D printing which can make some useful things. And as that advances, there will be more scope for us to have control over our physical objects as well. So look at gnu.org/philosophy/freehardwaredesigns.html for everything I have to say about that.
Would you have any suggestions for patents? Patent law? I mean,
Well, there's no reason to have patents. The world would do just fine if we got rid of patents entirely. The only reason patents continue is the plutocrats who have got power over governments and stop them from getting rid of patents and have done policy laundering by setting up treaties whose purpose is only to make various countries screw their populations by agreeing to have patents. However, patents do a special harm in 3 specific areas. One of them is software, another is agriculture, and another is medicine. Interestingly, these 3 problems are of different kinds. They work differently. In the field of software, patents on computational ideas restrict software development and create gridlock. In the software field, it's possible to combine thousands of ideas in one program, and it's not even a very big program. It's a program that a few people could write in a few years, and it would combine thousands of ideas. And if 10% of those ideas are patented, that's hundreds of patents to which one single program is vulnerable. On the other hand, the problem with medicine is different. We don't know how to combine thousands of medical ideas in one drug. That's beyond what's feasible. Combining a few ideas is the point that we've got to. But the problem with patents in medicine is that they kill poor people. The World Trade Organization, which imposes patents on medicine, is an organization of mass murder. Those who set up the World Trade Organization, those who keep it running, they should go on trial for murder. Every time somebody dies because they couldn't afford medicines that are patented, their funeral should be a political rally. Their tombstone should say, patented to death. And in agriculture, it's a different problem. Again, patents on plants or animals or genes in them deny farmers the ancient rights to copy their crops and their stock. That's fundamental injustice. Farmers must be entitled to let plants and animals copy each other, copy themselves and each other. So anything that denies that right must be eliminated.
Well, an extension to the previous question, we're in the era where the patent system is alive and it is still, I think, quite difficult to get rid of it. I mean, you know,
I don't claim to have solutions to the political problem of how you achieve these policies.
the question is, do you believe there could be turnarounds by using new forms of legislation, just as like the GPL, for instance?
Sorry, the GPL is not legislation. The GNU General Public License, to give it its full name, is a copyright-based free license.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the tracking issue that you mentioned before? I have the feeling that something is happening there, and you are right, but I can't really grasp the whole thing.
I don't know which tracking issue you
when
mean.
you said about the Facebook and about the photos and about the location. My question specifically is that this talk has been announced through the Free Software Foundation, it has been on the newspapers, it has been on the internet in several places. So it's very clear that at that specific moment you are really here.
Well, that's okay. This is a public activity. I'm not saying that nobody should ever do any public activity.
Sure, but then why, my phone doesn't even have a locator, but why a picture with a geolocation would cause a problem?
Because in general, because people have to learn to help protect each other's privacy. It's true that right now I'm doing a public event.
Yeah.
But even so, people might get this photo and they might find out where I was and they wouldn't even notice this record of the public event. A lot of surveillance is being done of everybody on a blanket basis. If somebody were making a specific effort to track me, he would surely look at all my statements of where I was giving a talk and so on. But I have no reason to think they're doing that. I know that they're snooping on me and tracking me because they're snooping on everyone and tracking everyone. But that's being done automatically. And those automatic systems might not include looking at announcements of my talks, and I don't want you to help them find out where I was. But the other thing is, you might meet me at a place that's not a public event. So it's important to get in the habit of protecting other people's privacy when you are being invited to be an auxiliary to surveillance.
Thanks.
But yes, massive surveillance is incompatible with democracy. If the government knows everywhere everyone goes and who talks with whom and what they say, the government can crush all dissidents and the government can find all whistleblowers. We can't control what the state does unless we know what it does. To know what the state's doing, we depend on whistleblowers, the heroes who risked their freedom to inform the public. But if they're going to be caught, they won't dare. So if we want to be able to control the state, we need to make it safe to be a whistleblower. If we want to have democracy, we need to make it safe to be a dissident. And that requires reducing surveillance to the point where the state can't tell who's a dissident and can't tell who's a whistleblower. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-vs-democracy.html. The article is, How Much Surveillance Can Democracy Endure?
What's your opinion regarding SCADA systems, high critical systems?
I can't, sorry, that's not a question. I don't understand the question. You say, what's my opinion about a certain kind of system, but that's too broad.
Regarding SCADA systems, high critical systems, banking systems.
Again, my opinion about them is too broad a question. I don't understand.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to...
I'm not an expert in that field.
No, I was trying to ask you if your opinion regarding those systems is that those systems should be open source or free.
I'm not in favor of open source. Open source is the slogan of people who disagree with me. I never use their term. I never advocate open source. I am in favor of free software for freedom, and that applies to all software. Whoever is using those systems deserves to control them. They shouldn't be controlled by somebody else. So ask yourself, who's running that system, this high reliability system? You may have to be more specific. What job is it doing? Now, here's one. There's a system for handling emergency calls. That needs to be a high reliability system. Who runs that system? Some state agency runs that system. So, who should have control over that system? The agency. The agency shouldn't let someone else have control over that system, so it should be free software. Now, there are other communication systems that are used by the Army. Who should have control over those communication systems? Obviously, the Army needs to have control over them. Do you want Microsoft to have control over them? It could sabotage them. So the answer is pretty clear. There's a bizarre idea that says if you want a program to be really reliable, then you should totally give up control over it. That's dumb.
Okay, I confused the free with the liability, with the owner. Because
Right.
my free is like on the internet, everyone can...
Right, well, the owner of such a system, well, what do you mean by the owner? Do you mean the agency that's running the system? I think that should be the owner. Not some other organization or company.
In your previous answer, I thought that I found a paradox because you discussed a limited size of a user, for example, an agency, but we have also the problem of the critical size of the community, because for the software to be free, we have to have an efficient community that can maintain and monitor that software. So if you have a small size of potential users, what's the critical size of the community?
I don't agree. I think that's just, there's a misunderstanding there of some kind. There is no minimum number of users to have a free program. What's needed is that people who want to do enough work. So a few people who really want to do work, or more people who have less time. But remember that there are different levels of development. If there are only a few people who want to use a program, and they don't have that much time, they'll make a bare bones program that just barely does the job. But if there are more people, they will do a nicer job. They'll make a better program. But in some ways, it's like a community and its infrastructure. You know, infrastructure takes work. So if there are only a few people, they don't make much infrastructure. It's just life. It's going to be that way. We have no magic way of getting programs developed with nobody who wants to write them.
Yes, but in the example of the agency is something not quite big and with a specific expertise, not a set of...
I'm sorry, I don't understand what question you're talking about. State agencies right now have to pay lots of money to get the non-free software that restricts them. It wouldn't cost any more to get free software developed. Developing a free program is not more expensive than developing a proprietary program. In fact, the same people might do it for the same price. So there's no problem there at all.
Yes, but the agency is the user, not the producer.
But the point is, the agency in those cases probably paid someone to write it. And if they had been wiser, they would have put in the contract that it had to be delivered as free software. And it would have been, and it would have cost the same amount.
Do you think that free software, in combination with technological evolution like 3D printing, could achieve the transformation of the existing economy model?
I have no idea. I'm not looking, you see, I'm not concerned so much with the economic model. I'm concerned directly with people's freedom. So for me, the economic issue is secondary. There's something more important at stake here. Non-free software is directly an injustice. Now, it also tends to fuel, in some cases, the development of giant companies, which then dominate the state and thus harm democracy. And that's bad too, but it's a secondary bad. Because even when the developer of a proprietary program is a small company, and that company has no great lobbying power, the program is still an injustice. So the non-free software is an injustice in itself, and if it becomes very popular and millions of people use it, then a company may have other kinds of unjust power. But that's a secondary development from the fact that the program is unjust to begin with. So I don't see this as a goal to transform the economy. This is a matter of human rights. A non-free program violates human rights. It's unacceptable.
One of the reasons that people use non-free software, certain kinds of non-free software, is that the companies behind the software itself, the ones that made it, have made ecosystems as well that support the program and merge it with other programs so that it's convenient. How is free software going to help?
Well, I don't like the term ecosystem because it's an amoral term. But to some extent, we already do the same thing. And to some extent, if we don't do as much of it, it's because we're limited by the numbers of supporters and contributors. I don't have a recipe to get more supporters and contributors except to give talks like this and publish articles occasionally. But why should it be me? You can do it. We need you to give more support to free software. We all have a part in society's choices about what software to use, and we all have influence. So really, this is no different from any other issue in which people are making various decisions and influencing each other. There's nothing magic we can do that will change the way this social system operates, right direction. But the more people appreciate that that our freedom is at stake and that non-free software is an injustice, the more often they will decide to reject the non-free software and make a sacrifice. When people are caught in a trap because it's inconvenient to get out, getting out requires a sacrifice. When people get angry enough, they can get out. I think we can end the question session now. So if you want to buy something, please come up and buy. Otherwise, happy hacking.